Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Rubin speaking to you from just east of Jerusalem. Today is the 5th day of Adar Sheni, 2nd Adar 5782, which marks 8th, 2022. This coming Shabbat, we begin the book of Leviticus, Vayikra in Hebrew, meaning "and he called." And the first Parashat, the first reading of Vayikra is called Vayikra, and it begins with Leviticus 1:1, concluding with chapter 5, verse 26. And this coming Shabbat is also Parashat Zachor, meaning it is the Shabbat preceding Purim, and in the Shabbat preceding Purim, our mafter, the last section of our Torah reading, instead of reading the final few verses of the weekly Torah reading a second time, as we usually do, that eighth person who comes up to read from the Torah, we read Zachor, Parashat Zachor, which is Deuteronomy chapter 25, beginning chapter 25, verse 17, and it concludes, I have it right here, it concludes with verse 19. It's 3 verses that we read, and we read that the Shabbat before Purim because it's telling us to remember what Amalek did to us, how he attacked us in the wilderness, unprovoked, cruelly and viciously, and God commanded us to destroy the memory of Amalek, to wipe Amalek out. And of course, we've never quite completely succeeded. And Haman, the villain of the Purim story, Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther, is a descendant of Amalek. And he, again, as we know in the story of Purim, he tries to organize the genocide of the Jewish people who, by and large, were living within the Persian Empire at that time. We're going to be talking about Purim a little bit later in our show today. I hope I have time to talk about Purim a bit and also about this week's Parashat Vayikra, which I'm going to start with. And of course, next week, since you've asked, next Wednesday is actually Ta'anit Esther, the fast of Esther, a morning sunrise to sundown fast, which precedes the festival of Purim. So we fast, and we fast until the evening service, and immediately after the evening service, we read Megillat Esther, read from the scroll of Esther, beginning to end without any breaks, without any talking, because we need to hear the whole thing, of course, except when the name Haman, the arch villain, is mentioned, then we jeer and make lots of noise to blot out his name as a symbolic way of blotting out the name of Amalek. And only after we finish reading the Megillah do people break the fast. And then, of course, the next day is Purim all over the world, except in Jerusalem, where Purim is celebrated the following day, known as Shushan Purim. And that's because Jerusalem was a walled city at the time of the events that took place in the story of Esther, which took place between during the building of the Second Temple, after the Jews had returned from Babylon to Jerusalem and begun to build the Second Temple. And there are many different political intrigues that caused them to have to stop the work along the way. And there is actually a very amazing midrashic understanding of the book of Esther, which ties it all in with the building of the temple. It makes a lot of sense when you read it that way. It all works out. You get a lot of insight. We're not going to talk about that today. Perhaps next week's show, we'll get into that. So, and I think the only other city who I think celebrates Purim on Shushan Purim, I think might be the city of Shiloh, which was also a walled city at the time. Okay, let's begin with Leviticus, Vayikra, the third book of the 5 books of Moses, they being Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. It's the middle book, and it's, in a way, it's the heart of everything, because it talks about, in great detail and at great length, the workings, what happens, what takes place inside the tabernacle, that beautiful tabernacle, which the children of Israel just completed building at the conclusion of the book of Exodus. And I'm going to read the first few verses from Vayikra, from Leviticus, first in Hebrew, then in English. Vayikra el Moshe vayedaber HaShem elav me'ol moed lemor. Daber al bnei Yisrael v'amart alehem Adam ki yakriv mikem korban l'Hashem mina behema mina bakar u'mina tzon takrivu et korbanchem. Im ola korbano mina bakar zachar tamim yakrivenu el petach el moed yakriv oto liratzono lifnei Hashem. Okay, I'm going to translate now into English. He called to Moshe, and HaShem spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when a man among you brings an offering to HaShem from animals, from the cattle or from the flock, shall you bring your offering. Okay, that's how it begins, and then it goes into a long description, pretty much takes up the entire portion of different types of offerings. Different animal offerings, different there's sin offering. There's a thanks offering. There's a shalem, a peace offering. There's the meal offerings. There's the wine libations, etc., etc. It's going to describe them all, on and on. But before we get into that, and of course, whenever we begin the book of Vayikra, there's always the question that's, I know, in the back of a lot of people's minds. Okay, so they did offerings, they made offerings. Is that something that we're going to do when the Mikdash, when the Holy Temple is built? And the answer to that question is that's what we're intended to be doing. There was no cease and desist order in the Torah that for a certain time we won't be making offerings as long as the temple, or even as long as the altar is built in its proper place on the Temple Mount, we can begin to make offerings. So then the next question is, well, what's it all about then? You know, if it's something so important, what's it all about? We're going to get to that. And even if we don't get to it completely and in depth this week, it's something we will be talking about in the upcoming weeks, because we are in the book of Leviticus, and we're going to be talking about it. But I first want to focus on the opening verse of Vayikra, because I think it tells us a lot, and also tie it into the closing verses of Exodus. Vayikra, and he called. First of all, it's interesting, to say the least, that it didn't say, and HaShem called to Moshe and said to him. No, it says, Vayikra el Moshe vayedaber HaShem. And not only that, but in the word of Vayikra, which is spelled Vav Yud Kuf Resh Aleph, the Aleph, which of course is the first letter of the Aleph Bet, the alphabet, the Aleph is always written very small. In a Sefer Torah, it's a rule. It has to be written small. What's that all about? And why is Hashem why is Hashem not mentioned? Hashem spoke to Moshe. I mean, this is important stuff. Well, it kind of ties into the conclusion of the book of of Exodus. And the last verses were, verse 34 in chapter 40, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, the cloud of Hashem's kavod, his honor, his glory. And when the glory of Hashem filled the tabernacle, Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting, for the cloud rested upon it, and the glory of Hashem filled the tabernacle. Then it goes on to say, when the cloud was raised up from their tabernacles, the children of Israel would embark on all their journeys. If the cloud did not rise up, they would not embark until the day it rose up, for the cloud of Hashem would be on the tabernacle by day, and fire would be on it all night before the eyes of all the house of Israel throughout their journeys. And that's the conclusion of Exodus. And then moving right into Leviticus, and he called to Moshe and Hashem spoke to him from the tent of meeting. So we have this funny conundrum that Hashem asks of, requests of, commands, however you want to put it. I always say ask or request because it had to come from us. Remember, it had to come from our house. It had to be in Nedivat Libenu, a generosity of our hearts. It had to be our ratzon, our will, to make a space in our world, in our community, within our nation, space in which Hashem's presence could dwell. And Israel did that, and we talked about it last week. They were praised for the alacrity with which they built the tabernacle, and how they were focused on it, and everybody got involved, and everybody gave of themselves, of their possessions, of their talents, of their time, of their labor. And Moshe blessed everybody, and lo and behold, Hashem's presence in the guise of a cloud of glory enters and so fills it. And again, God is not a physical thing. And the cloud of his that is visible to the children of Israel was a manifestation of God's presence, but it wasn't. God's presence is not physical, but somehow God's non-physical presence filled the tabernacle in a way that Moshe could not enter. It was like a force field or something. Moshe could not enter. So it's almost like an O. Henry story. There's an irony here that Israel goes all out, creates a space for Hashem. Hashem fills the space, and then, oops, there's no space for Israel again. There's no space for Moshe to enter. So how is this going to work? Now, the idea of making a space is so essential to Judaism, to the Torah understanding of the world, of creation, because God, his presence, fills everything and beyond. God is everything. So our sages say when God had in his thought, as it were, to create, he had a conundrum. He had to create first a void, an empty space, so he could fill it with creation, because he can't create and put creation in a place, as it were, that is all Hashem. So according to the teachings of the blessed Rabbi Yitzhak Luria of blessed memory, Hashem created within his infinite being a void, and then filled the void with the light of his creation. And so that creating a space is known as tzimtzum, which means to decrease. God decreased, as it were, his infinite presence so that he could fill that void left when he decreased his presence from it with creation, and then fill creation with his presence again. And now he's going back to the conclusion of the book of Exodus. God's presence in a very constricted manner is going to fill the tabernacle. This is how it's working. But God's presence fills the tabernacle. So now it's after Israel basically acting godlike. Israel also was mitzamtzim. Israel also created a space within Israel, within the body of Israel, within the encampment of Israel, a physical space, but also a spiritual space where Hashem's presence could dwell. And that, again, that comes from that generosity of the heart. That comes from the heart. That comes from making a space within each of us for Hashem, which we each need to do as individuals. That's how we walk with Hashem. We create a space. We negate our own ego. We empty ourselves of our presence, of me, of I, me, mine, and create a space where Hashem can dwell within us. And as a nation, Israel was asked to do the same, and Israel did, created the tabernacle. So now Hashem, and he says Vayikra, he called, and that little aleph is telling us that Hashem now is, again, within the confines of the tabernacle. God's infinite presence within those confines. God is doing it tzimtzum again. God is creating a void again, creating a space so that man can enter, so that this sacred space of the tabernacle is a space for Hashem and for man. Now, in the Holy of Holies, of course, there's only one day of the year where a man even enters, and for only a few moments. Of course, the the Kohen Gadol, the high priest on Yom Kippur, and the Kodesh, the sanctuary, where the Kohanim go and they perform the incense offering, where they keep the menorah kindled, and where they keep the showbreads on the table of the showbread. That is a sacred space for man and God, where there is more of a presence. There's a daily presence of these representatives of Israel, representatives of man, and the Kohanim and the priests that go into that space. And then, of course, in the courtyard, the outer courtyard where the altar is and the offerings are, that is even a greater space for mankind to be in, because people who bring their offerings go in there. And of course, the Kohanim there are performing the offerings, and et cetera, and it spreads out into the Israel and, of course, all the world. But the point is, it's a neat trick that Hashem has. Israel makes a space for Hashem, and then Hashem makes a space for Israel. And now, in that space, that's where Hashem's speaking to Moshe. Because Hashem speaks to Moshe from between the Kruvim, between the cherubim, above the Aron, above the Ark of the Covenant. That's what we're told. And so in that point of confluence, that point in time and space and creation and beyond creation and infinity, there's this point of contact between man and God, and that is in the tabernacle, later the Holy Temple. And that's all important. All important. So what does Hashem say to Moshe? First of all, he says, speak to the children of Israel. Say to them, when a man among you brings an offering to Hashem from animals, from the cattle, from the flock, you shall bring your offering. It's very interesting when you think about it, that the first thing that God says to Moshe, when all this has been done, when Israel has built the tabernacle, when God's presence has filled it, when God has created a space for man to re-enter into the tabernacle, the first thing Hashem says is, when a man among you wants to bring a korban, an offering, this is how you do it, an offering of an animal. Okay, again, every year we go over the vocabulary here because it's so important in trying to get an understanding of the offerings, what it was all about. It's so important to understand the meaning of the Hebrew and some of the hidden meanings of the Hebrew text in the verses, and also in order to understand at least what the Torah is trying to teach us. And I say to understand at least because the fact of the matter is that Judaism is an experiential religion. It's an experiential way of life. We experience the commandments. That's why we're commanded to do them, not just think about them, not just study them, but to do them. And everybody knows, who's ever observed Shabbat or been at a house with someone who's observant of Shabbat, that you really can't explain it. I mean, you can talk about it, you can tell the details, but it's, I always like to use this expression from a song from the 1960s. Do you believe in music? Or do you believe in magic, maybe, in a young girl's soul? The magic's in the music's, the music's in the magic's in the music, and the music's in rock and roll, something like that. It's from the Love and Spoonful, I think. And he says it's like trying to tell a stranger about rock and roll. Trying to tell someone about Shabbat. You really can't. The only thing you can really say is, come, join me, experience it for yourself. And only then do you really understand, because as a dry explanation, Shabbat, you don't do this, you don't do that, you pray, you eat. You take a rest, you sleep. It doesn't sound very exciting. It doesn't sound very rewarding. It sounds rather dry and rather restrictive. But actually, Shabbat, when you experience it, is incredibly liberating. I'm not just saying this to sound nice. I mean, I cannot explain to you how liberating the disconnect from the 6 days of creation, of the work week, the disconnect from electronics, the disconnect from all the noise and the din and the chaos that's going on outside, and the focus on our prayers, on connecting with Hashem, on reading from the Torah, and just being with family, with loved ones. It's an amazing experience. You have to experience it to really understand it. And I have to say that as much as we might try to intellectually and even emotionally and spiritually gain what we can from korbanot, from offerings, we're limited. We can only take it so far because we're not experiencing it today. But we can try. So what I want to say is that a few important things that, first of all, korban is offering, Hebrew for offering. It's from the word lakarev or lahakriv, to bring near, to draw near, to make near. So a korban isn't an offering. It's not a sacrifice, which is really an inaccurate and misleading translation, because sacrifice suggests that you're giving up something of yourself. You're taking away from yourself, almost like you're diminishing yourself. It's almost like it's a painful act. No, to bring a korban is to bring yourself nearer to Hashem. That's the point of it. How does it work? Well, we'll talk about that, and we'll try to get an understanding of it. But the action is to bring the person who brings the korban, to bring them nearer to Hashem, to close up the distance, to become closer to Hashem. Now, it says here in Hebrew, in verse 2, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Adam ki yakriv mikem korban Hashem mina behema. A man, Adam, right? Adam, right? Who's Adam? Adam is the first man. We're all the sons of Adam, or the daughters of Adam. And usually, more commonly, the word for man is ish. Here, the word Adam, which just brings us right back to the Garden of Eden. I mean, it's right in our face, the Garden of Eden. And Adam, who was created from the earth and filled with the spirit, with the breath of Hashem, which gave man life, which gave man a sort of duality in his being. One part of him was earthbound and of this world, and the other part of him was aspiring upward, heavenward, aspiring to be closer to Hashem. This is the tension which is within man. That's what we live with every day, with every breath of our lives. And it says here, when man brings among you an offering of an animal, behema. Right? A behema is an earthbound creature. Now we say that our lower soul is a soul akin to the soul of a behema, because it's the soul of, it's a nefesh, it's life force. It's the life force. And as human beings, like I said a moment ago, we have two aspirations. One is to be more spiritual, to be closer to Hashem, to raise ourselves up. And the other is the physical, the behema, the animal in us, the animal instinct, which at best is a necessary instinct of survival for sure, but when left on its own, it can lead us astray into all sorts of sinful activity, all sorts of lustful things or greedy things or violence, etc., etc. So what the Torah is telling us right now, in just a few words, sort of an outline of what this whole program is all about, we bring an animal, we bring our animal soul, and we raise it up, and then purify it, and perhaps even eliminate it to the extent that we can be more spiritual beings. That is in a very pithy explanation what the korbanot are all about. We are raising ourselves up by refining, purifying our more base selves. And that allows our more spiritual, pure selves to flourish, to take wing, to become free. That is what the main direction of korbanot are all about. Again, la'akriv is to bring near. And what we are doing is bringing ourselves nearer by offering up our animal, letting go of our animal selves and allowing our spiritual selves, our more godly selves, to open up and address Hashem, and to be open to what Hashem has to address to us. Okay, and one other aspect about the korbanot I'm going to say as an introduction before we go on to talk in the last 10 minutes or so about Purim is a few verses later, verse 8, I believe. Verse 9, he, talking about the Kohanim, well, he shall wash its innards and its feet with water, and the Kohen shall cause it to go up and smoke on the altar, a burnt offering, a fire offering. And in English it says a satisfying aroma to Hashem. And in Hebrew, of course, it's that beautiful expression, reach nichoach Hashem. Reach nichoach, which literally means reach, means scent, aroma. Nichoach means calming. Noach, the name Noach who built the ark, his name means rest. It means peaceful. It means, and then the word menucha is rest, from the same word. And so Noach also means pleasing. It's calming. So this reach nichoach is this pleasing, calming experience, as it were, for Hashem. There's an expression that we use today in Hebrew, nachat ruach, and oftentimes people shorten it to nachas. You get nachas out of your children. You get a joy out of your children. You get nachat ruach out of your children. You get this immense pleasure and of a loving sense of pleasure and calm when you see your children doing the right thing, when you see your children being good people. Everybody who has children knows what I'm talking about. When you see your children doing the right thing, it's sort of a unique experience. You just get this wonderful sense. It's pride, but it's more than pride. It's like the world is good, like things are right. It all makes sense. That's the reach nichoach. So a question that we always ask when it comes to korbanot is, who are the korbanot for? Are they for Hashem or are they for man? And it's a very good question, and I think it's not an easy one to answer, or I should say there may be more than one answer. Of course, unlike pagan offerings where worshippers would bring an offering, an animal, in order to satisfy the lust or the anger, placate the anger of their god, or even with the concept that their god was actually going to eat of this. It doesn't work that way. It's not like that at all in Judaism. As far as Hashem is concerned, there's this wonderful feeling that the children are reaching out to him. Children are doing the right thing, and that's what grants Hashem such a reich nichoach, such a pleasurable aroma. It's not the scent of the burning flesh. It's the scent. It's the aroma of the ratzon, the will, the desire of the person making the offering. We're going to talk about that again over in these upcoming weeks at length. I just want to remind you all that reich nichoach, I think the first time we hear the expression in the Torah is when Noach made his offering after the flood, and it said it was a pleasing aroma, a sweet fragrance, sometimes they say, to Hashem. Again, but so for Hashem, it's this wonderful feeling of feeling rewarded that these children they're doing the right thing. They're on the right path. When your kids have finally figured out who they are, and they're doing the right thing, and they're heading in the right direction, you get a wonderful feeling. That's what Hashem experiences with each korban. And as far as the individual, the human, the Adam, the man, he is working at his own refinement and spiritual perfection by bringing a korban. We're going to leave this for now and speak a little bit about Purim, because it's coming up. We'll be able to talk about it much more next week as well. But I just want to say a few things. First, I'm going to start with Zachor, Parashat Zachor, the 3 verses that we read at the end of our reading in Shabbat, at the end of the reading of Vayikra, this coming Shabbat, and they are a chovah, they're an obligation for everybody to hear them. It's actually a commandment, because we're commanded to blot out the memory of Amalek from beneath the heavens. And while the real commandment is to wipe out this source of evil from earth, we symbolically fulfill the commandment by hearing these verses each year, and they are: you shall remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you went out of Egypt, how he happened upon you on the way and cut off all the stragglers at your rear when you were faint and weary, and he did not fear God. Therefore it will be, when HaShem your God grants you respite from all your enemies around you in the land which HaShem your God gives to you as an inheritance to possess, that you shall obliterate the remembrance of Amalek from beneath the heavens. You shall not forget. Now, just a few things I'd like to say about all this is that A, we are commanded to remember, and we're commanded to not forget. B, it says when Asher karcha b'derech, when Amalek happened to you, the word kara just means happen. When he happened to you, and there was no motivation, there was nothing leading up to it, there was no reason, but the word kara in that sense also associated with the understanding of happenstance. That things just happen. And again, in Yahadut, in Torah, we don't believe that things just happen. There's a plan, there's a reason. Even things that seem to be happenstance all fit into a plan, whether we understand it or not. But one of the lessons that we learned from this is that when you start thinking that things just happen, there's just happenstances, there's no rhyme or reason to creation, to reality, to our lives, that's when Amalek is going to get you. Because that's what Amalek thrives on. The word Amalek in Hebrew, Ayin Mem Lamech Kuf, has the same gematria, the same numerical value the letters do as the word in Hebrew safek, which means doubt. When you start to doubt that Hashem's present, that Hashem is directing things, that's when you become easy prey for Amalek. And it's emphasized in the next verse, which is translated, and he did not fear God. But in Hebrew, the word he isn't there. It's velo yare Elohim, and there was no fear of God. So again, another interpretation of that is that it was Israel who was not fearing God. It was Israel who was straying. It was Israel who was growing lax, and again, making itself easy prey for this evil of believing that there's no rhyme or reason, that there's no reason to be good. There's no reason to be a better person. There's no reason to do mitzvot. There's no reason to relate to Hashem, because it all just happens. These are some of the lessons that we learn just in these few verses. I hear the music now. We'll talk a lot more next week about Purim. Remember to blot out the memory of Amalek. You shall not forget. Thank you so much for being with me.